Afternoon, everybody. My name is Kevin Mahaney, and yes, I'm with the Office of Student Financial Aid over at Georgetown. And I've been at Georgetown for about 15 years, and I've been in higher education for about 25 years, all in financial aid. And I absolutely love the online nursing program here at Georgetown. I've been here with online nurses since the inception back in 2010, 2011. So you guys in this program really hold a place near and dear to my heart. So thanks very much for joining me. We're going to talk about the Grad Plus loan, of course, and some of the impacts of the big, beautiful bill that was passed and what that means, especially for folks who are beginning their program in the spring. But we're also going to talk a little bit about the cost of attendance, the financial aid process, how to pay for school, and all of that good stuff. Now, I will say I've got a PowerPoint for you, but you'll have to forgive me. I borrowed it from the McDonough School of Business here at Georgetown. So the label says business school, but all of the information on each of these slides pertains to the online nurses. So if you guys could just ignore that for me, that'd be great. I'd really appreciate it. But yeah, and if like Edith said, if you guys can put your questions in the chat. We will address all of them at the end. This should only take like 20, 30 minutes, but I've scheduled the whole hour. So feel free to ask as many questions as you need. So here, let me see if I can share my screen. All right. Okay. All right. So, yes, we're going to talk about funding your degree, cost of attendance. I've got a sample budget for you guys. And we can talk about some federal loans and some other ways to finance that. Right. And so I do want to say up front that these figures that you're looking at, they're really only for the spring and summer terms. Right. And so each fiscal year, Georgetown does increase tuition, usually anywhere between 0.5% and upwards of like 3.5%, right, depending on the year. But these figures that you see, this is going to be for the spring and summer terms, and essentially it's based on 13 credits, right? So you may take 6 credits in the spring, 7 credits in the summer, or 7 credits in the spring, or 6 credits in the summer, but it's based on a 13 credit 2-term period. I did put the cost per credit up there, so if you're thinking about the going full time, or if you're taking more than 13 credits, just kind of plug in your own math numbers there with the tuition and fees, right? And the important thing to note is this indirect expenses, that those numbers are going to be the same no matter how many credits you're taking, right? So, the tuition and fees for 13 credits is going to be about $34,000, and those are direct expenses, right? And what that means is you're going to get a bill from Georgetown with your tuition charges and your mandatory fees on it, right? The indirect expenses are things that you're not going to be charged for, right? But we have placed in the cost of attendance because we think that you'll need them, and in fact, some students will either leave their current employment situation, or they'll reduce their hours to come back to school. And so, students can borrow loans to pay rent, buy food, of course, books and supplies and things like that. But I want to be upfront, you don't have to borrow for the indirect expenses, right? Because again, you're not being charged for your indirect expenses by Georgetown, at least, right? So in this example, right, when you're taking 13 credits between the 2 terms, the spring and the summer, your total cost of attendance is going to be, $66,000, right? There is an option that you don't see here. There is Georgetown. Actually, no, this is an online program, so skip that. So when you after you complete your FAFSA, right, and we'll get to the cycle in a minute, you're going to receive a financial aid package from our office electronically. You're going to receive an email and say, hey, please check out your GU Experience site. We've set you up with a financial aid package. And so I've got a couple of sample financial aid packages here, right? I do want to point out that our office, the financial aid office, unfortunately, we do not have any scholarships for any of our graduate students, regardless of the program. But some programs do have scholarships, and that first number you see there, it's completely arbitrary, and some people may have access to less, some people may have access to more, some people may not receive a merit scholarship. So this is just an example, right? So we take our cost of attendance, and all of your scholarships, all of your loans, they've got to fit within that cost of attendance, right? And so folks who may have access to a scholarship, in this example, it's $3,000, are eligible to borrow $63,000, right? In this particular example, right? Now, what we're going to do, if you're otherwise eligible and you've completed your FAFSA, we're going to set you up with a $20,500 unsubsidized loan, right? It's the less expensive of the two federal loans that are currently in existence. And so it's always a good idea to borrow that unsubsidized loan first. If you need to borrow loans, it is a guaranteed loan, meaning there's no credit authorization, right, or anything like that. You're going to sign a master promissory note, and you're going to do something called an entrance counseling, right? And then you're kind of guaranteed that money. And again, as long as you're otherwise eligible, and I'll kind of go into the eligibility requirements later on as well, right? And so in this first example, that would leave you with a $43,000 graduate plus loan, right? Now, unlike the unsubsidized loan, the graduate plus loan, it does require credit authorization, although it's a less stringent credit check than if you're going out to get like a mortgage or a car loan or something like that, right? So it's it is, both of these they're both federal loan programs, right? The Grad Plus loan is a good way to fill any kind of gaps, right? That the unsubsidized loan doesn't fill, right? I mean, especially if you go back to the top here, right? $34,000 for tuition and fees in your first two terms. Again, if you're taking 13 credits between those two terms, right? The 20,000 is not going to do it. So you would, if you're planning on financing the entire degree, which most students do. Most students do finance the entire degree with federal loans, private loans, things like that. Then you would need a little bit of the graduate plus loan. But again, if you don't need money for living expenses, right? If you've got savings, or if you're going to continue to work, you don't have to borrow any of these funds right here, right? So in the second example, it's the same as the first, just minus any kind of scholarship funding, right? And so in that particular example, you can borrow the full $66,000. And again, the $20,500 is there for everybody who qualifies. And again, that is the loan that you'll want to borrow first, right? And so in this next slide, and these numbers are static, right? So what I want you all to do is head over to studentaid.gov at some point, right, before the term starts, and kind of play around with the numbers, plug in the numbers that you think you're going to borrow, right? And there is a loan repayment simulator, right? Loan repayment calculator, right? Now, right now, the federal government has like 4 or 5 different repayment plans. That may change moving forward. They're probably going to water that down, and stuff like that. But what you're looking at here are the standard like 10 to 12 year repayment plans where you're making equal payments per month, right? And again, what I've done is I've taken the figures from these first two terms and kind of plugged them in the loan simulator just to give you an idea of what your repayment will look like, right? Or may look like when you're done and you've got your degree, right? And so if somebody were to borrow, the full amount for these first two terms, when they're done, if they elected to go into the 10-year repayment plan, they'd be paying about $900 a month, right? In loans. If you go into the 12-year repayment plan, it's about almost $1,200, right? And so then you can kind of see how that will go up if you're borrowing more and more each and every term, right? So at any rate, again, don't bank on these numbers. These aren't your numbers per se in particular. We do want you to go over the studentaid.gov to the loan simulator and kind of play around with this, right? It's good to know what you're getting into. So I did mention I was going to talk about eligibility. So, and maybe I should have put this slide first, but really the only application to get everything started is the FAFSA application, right? And please make sure you're completing the 2025-2026 FAFSA application. Right now, if you guys go out to studentaid.gov, there's going to be two options, right? The 25-26 and the 26-27. We can't use the 26-27 yet. And so for this specific spring start admission cycle, please complete the 2025-2026 version. In addition to that, please make sure you're putting 001445 on as a school code, right? Otherwise, the government's not going to send us your information. So 001445 is the only school code that's going to work for Georgetown. There may be other school codes that the federal government has that they're giving you options, but those don't work. So 001445, that's the only one. Please use that one. And please do a 25-26 FAFSA application, right? So when you do your FAFSA application, the government's doing a couple of things, right? They're checking your citizenship. And you do have to be eligible non-citizen or a U.S. citizen to have access to these federal loans, the unsubsidized loan and the Graduate Plus loan. And that includes having a valid Social Security number. This online nursing program, all of them, the midwifery, the women's health, the nurse practitioner, they're all eligible programs, right? All of the Georgetown University online nursing programs are eligible, federal aid eligible programs, right? Now, in terms of past degrees, you just got to not be in default with your old loans to get new federal loans, and there's got to not be any conflicting information. But these days, that's few and far between, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. The FAFSA application is only going to ask you for your income information. It's not going to ask for your parents. Right. So if I've got any students out there who are on this webinar who are currently undergrads or were in undergraduate school last year, this new 25-26 FAFSA that you're going to complete for us, we do not need your parent information, just your income information. Right. And so it should take you about 10-15 minutes with the skip logic. So once you complete your FAFSA, in fact, let me go to this next slide and I can switch back. So you're going to submit your FAFSA. We'll get it. We'll receive it. We'll review it. Once we've set you up with a financial aid package, and there's a few of I want to say there's 5 or 6 of you that are going to get some information tomorrow. We usually send out financial aid notifications on Tuesdays and Fridays. So tomorrow, I think I've got 5 or 6 online nursing packages that are going out. You're going to receive an email inviting you to log on to your GU Experience site. And when you do that, there's going to be a financial aid card kind of deal. And you're going to click into that, and that's where you're going to see your loan information, right? That's where you're going to accept the loans that you need. And once you do that, links are going to appear for the loan requirements. Right. And so let me skip back for a minute. Right. So the unsubsidized loan does require a master promissory note, as I mentioned, and entrance counseling. Right. The Graduate Plus loan requires a separate master promissory note. Right. So in the end, if you borrow both loans, you'll have done 2 master promissory notes. The entrance counseling, one entrance counseling can take care of both loans. And then, of course, the credit authorization or the credit check. Right. And all of the loan requirements are completed at studentaid.gov. So you'll complete those loan requirements at studentaid.gov. The information will transfer back to Georgetown, so on and so forth, right? And so for the spring term, I want to say that your the earliest we can disperse these federal loans is the first week in January, right? And that's important to note for folks who are going to be utilizing loans for rent and things like that, right? And once your loans disperse, the Revenue and Receivables Office will take what they need for your tuition charges, and then they will make any overages available to you as a refund, right? And you would request that refund again via your GU Experience site, right? Your GU Experience site's where you're going to do all your financial aid stuff. It's where you're going to register for classes. And it's where you're going to view your billing statements from the student accounts office and so on and so forth. I do want to, before we move on to the next slide, I do want to mention to folks, if you are a student who has taken out loans in the past, and if you are currently in a repayment status for those loans, when you come back to school, right, when you come to Georgetown and enroll in the spring, at least at a half-time status, which for you guys is 4.5 credits, your lenders who were charging you each month for those loans, those prior loans will go back into what's called a deferment status, right? And that's a process that's run by our office of the registrar. Our registrar's office will automatically update what's called the National Student Clearinghouse, and that's where your lenders who hold your loans from your prior degrees, that's where they will go to see who's in school and who's not, right? And so that happens automatically. But if you have any questions about the loan deferment process, right, to get your old loans out of the repayment statuses, the office of the registrar is the place to go, right, for that. So if you didn't want to borrow from the federal government, which is fine, because we have students who take out private educational loans, there are a plethora of private educational loan products, right? As of right now, Georgetown does not have a preferred lender, and we do not recommend any one lender over another. Although if that changes, we'll be sure to let the entire student body know. And again, you can borrow from whomever you like, right? And you can borrow up to the full cost of attendance, minus any federal loans or minus any scholarships or anything like that. So essentially, you can borrow $66,000 in a private loan if you want. You can borrow $43,000 in a private loan instead of taking the Graduate Plus loan if you want. I will say that the if you can get the Graduate Plus loan, most students will take the Graduate Plus loan, one, because it's easier to obtain, right? The credit check is less stringent, even than most like private educational loans. The repayment plans for the Grad Plus loans are more robust, right? They're a little bit more lenient with the repayment plans. When you go through a private lender, you're kind of at the mercy of the private lender, right? So the lender is going to have their repayment plans, and that's what they're going to be, right? I'm not saying that you wouldn't be able to work with them on multiple repayment plans, but again, it just seems to us throughout our many years of doing this that students prefer to go through the government. So if you're able to get in and attend for the spring, you're really going to want to try to think about that, because the Grad Plus loans are going away, right? And I haven't talked about that yet, but I will. The Grad Plus loans are going away as of July 1st, except for if you are already in a graduate degree seeking program, right? So, we really do, those of us in the financial aid office, we really do feel that students who start in the spring have a little bit of advantage over our students who are going to start in the fall, right? And that in terms of access, right? Because if you begin in the spring term, right? If you start to attend in the spring term, and if you complete the Grad Plus loan applications, if a Grad Plus loan disperses for the spring term, right? Anytime before July 1, actually, for this particular program, then you're grandfathered in. Those students are grandfathered in. So what that would mean is that then you would then have access to both the unsubsidized loan and the Grad Plus loan for the duration of your degree, right? Or 3 years, right? Whatever happens first, right? And so if a student starts in the fall, right? Your financial aid package would just look very different. It would be void of the Graduate Plus loan, and a student who starts in the fall, their only option other than the unsubsidized loan would be a private education loan. Now, private education loans aren't bad, right? These aren't predatory lenders and things like that. And we do have a list of lenders that students have used in the past. And in fact, sometimes you can get a lower interest rate by going through a private lender. If you do go the private loan route, there's a couple of questions that you're going to want to keep in the back of your mind as you're doing your research, right? One, you're going to want to make sure that you're applying for a loan that has a fixed interest rate, right? You don't want it jumping around. And sometimes you'll see a loan product that'll have a very low interest rate, but it'll say variable. And what does that mean, right? So if you do apply for a loan with a variable interest rate, you'll want to talk to your lender and get a really clear idea of what are the variables. You don't want to start out at 1.5% and then have it go up to like 13 or something like that. Now, again, most educational loan products, they're competing with each other, right? So sometimes you're going to get that lower interest rate, and they're not going to be they're not going to diverge from themselves from the different kind of products, right? But make sure you're applying for a interest rate that's fixed, or try to apply for a loan that has a fixed interest rate. Make sure you are fully prepared for whatever their repayment plans are, right? The private lender repayment plans, and make sure that the private loans can be deferred while you're in school, right? Your federal loans are automatically deferred, right? You don't have to do anything. Most private loans will be deferred while you're in school, but just again, 3 things to not take for granted, right? Just make sure that you're doing your research and your due diligence. But again, I think that the big advantage that you in this group that you guys have is by starting in the spring versus starting in the fall, that you do have access to this Grad Plus loan, right? And it's a shame that it is going away. I can answer questions about the grandfathering in of the Grad Plus loan and what that means and all that stuff after the webinar, and we're almost done with my section. So. But yeah, so private loans is definitely another way to fund your degree, and it's certainly there. I'm gonna I told you guys this is gonna be short. I'm gonna stick around and answer some questions. If you're thinking about this or you're doing research or you need to get in touch with us later, right? This is how to get in touch with us. You can either email osfsgradfinaid@georgetown.edu. Or FinAid Online Nursing. All of the online nursing students, you guys have a specific financial aid team, but there's folks at OSFS Grad FinAid who can answer your questions as well. So that is how you get in touch with us. I do recommend visiting our website, finaid.georgetown.edu. There's not only information on federal loans and private loans, but there's also information on some of the other things that I was talking about. I want to just share real quick, if you guys don't mind, just let me get to it. The website, just so everybody can see. Sorry, I'm old in the way. It takes me forever to do things. All right, so yeah, so this is our website, and again, we've got your own School of Nursing graduate online section. This financial resources is applicable to everybody here on this call. Federal loans, especially private loans and stuff like that. But the federal loan sites can all be found here, and anything that you wanted to read up on about the Grad Plus loan and whatnot can be found here as well. And this is the site where we'll update information, right? So as the government changes the rules and as they feed us the information, that's where we're going to share it. So feel free to visit that website early and often. And Edith, I think that's all for me for the presentation. So I'd be happy to field any questions that anybody has. Thanks for listening to me, guys.